The train rattled through the Austrian countryside as Captain William Harper studied the identity papers one final time. August 1944. The documents identified him as Dr. Franz Dietrich, a geographer from the University of Vienna specializing in regional cartography and land surveys. The papers were perfect, aged appropriately, stamped with authentic seals, complete with a work history that would withstand scrutiny. Everything except the photograph looked like it had existed for years. Harper spoke flawless German, had memorized every detail of Franz Dietrich's fabricated academic career, and carried luggage filled with surveying equipment, maps, and research notes that would satisfy any inspection. But none of that stopped his heart from racing as the train approached the checkpoint entering German-occupied Czechoslovakia. 2 months earlier, Harper had been teaching navigation and map reading at an SOE training facility in Scotland. His background as a surveyor before the war, combined with his linguistic abilities, had caught someone's attention. The briefing had been delivered by a colonel who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. "We're losing agents in Central Europe at an alarming rate," the colonel had said, spreading maps across the table. "Not captured in the field, that's expected. These agents are being rolled up within days of insertion. Safe houses compromised before they're used. Resistance contacts arrested before first meetings. Someone is feeding the Germans detailed intelligence about our operations." A double agent, Harper had suggested. Possibly, but the pattern suggests something more systematic. "We think the Germans have created a comprehensive intelligence map of resistance activities across occupied Europe. Not just troop movements or strategic targets, but the entire underground network. Safe houses, radio operators, supply caches, escape routes. Somewhere, they're maintaining a master map of our clandestine operations. And you want me to find it. Find it, photograph it, and if possible, determine how they're gathering the intelligence. This map represents years of German counterintelligence work. If we can access it, we'll know what they know. We can protect compromised operations and feed them disinformation through channels they think are secure." The mission was based on a piece of intelligence so specific it had to be genuine. The German Abwehr maintained secret cartography unit in Prague, disguised as a civilian Geographic Research Institute. This unit compiled intelligence from across occupied Europe into detailed maps used for counterintelligence operations. And they were apparently seeking experienced cartographers to help expand their mapping operations into newly occupied territories. Harper's cover was designed to infiltrate this unit. Dr. Franz Dietrich had published several academic papers on Central European geography before the war, papers that British intelligence had actually written and planted in obscure academic journals years earlier as preparation for operations like this. The cover had been aging since 1938, waiting for the right moment and the right person. The checkpoint guard studied Harper's papers with the bored efficiency of someone who'd processed thousands of travelers. Purpose of visit to Prague? Academic consultation. The Reich Institute for Geographic Research has requested my expertise on Carpathian topography. The guard stamped the papers without further questions. Harper collected his luggage and continued the journey, allowing himself a small breath of relief. First hurdle cleared. Prague in 1944 was a city under siege from within. German military presence was everywhere, but so was the barely concealed hatred of the Czech population. Posters offered rewards for information about resistance activities. Public executions were announced on wall notices. The occupation had been relatively quiet in the early war years, but now, with Germany facing setbacks on multiple fronts, the SS had intensified their suppression efforts. Harper checked into a modest hotel frequented by academic visitors and traveling professionals. He spent 2 days establishing his presence, visiting libraries, examining maps at the National Museum, being seen in the places a legitimate academic would go. And on the third morning, he reported to the address provided in his recruitment letter. The Reich Institute for Geographic Research occupied an elegant building in Prague's Malá Strana district. From the outside, it appeared to be exactly what it claimed, a civilian research institution. But Harper noticed the subtle security measures. Guards who were clearly military despite civilian clothing, windows with reinforced frames, communications antennas that seemed excessive for a research facility. He was met by Dr. Klaus Zimmermann, the Institute's director, a thin man in his 60s with the permanent stoop of someone who'd spent decades bent over maps and documents. Dr. Dietrich, welcome. I've read your work on Carpathian watershed systems. Fascinating analysis of how geographic features influence population distribution. They discussed academic matters for 20 minutes, Zimmermann probing Harper's knowledge with increasingly technical questions. Harper had been thoroughly prepared, but he also understood that the best lie stayed as close to truth as possible. When he didn't know something, he admitted it honestly and suggested where he might find the answer. Experts who knew everything were suspicious. Experts who knew their limitations were credible. Finally, Zimmermann seemed satisfied. I should be frank about the nature of our work here, Doctor. While we do conduct legitimate geographic research, our primary function is supporting Reich security operations. We create maps for military and intelligence purposes. Some of this work is classified. Are you comfortable with such arrangements? Harper had prepared for this moment. Doctor, I'm a scientist, not a soldier. But I understand that in wartime, all knowledge serves the state. I'm prepared to contribute my expertise however it's most useful. Excellent. Then let me show you our operations. The tour revealed more than Zimmermann probably intended. The building's first 2 floors housed legitimate research, climatology, geology, demographic studies. But the 3rd floor required special access, and this was where the real work happened. Harper found himself in a large room filled with drafting tables, each covered with detailed maps. Cartographers worked with meticulous precision, updating maps based on stacks of intelligence reports. The maps themselves were extraordinary. They showed not just geographic features, but layers of human activity. Resistance cells marked with colored pins. Supply routes indicated with different line weights. Safe houses, radio operators, border crossing points, all documented with frightening precision. This is our Central European operations map, Zimmermann explained, gesturing to a massive wall display showing Czechoslovakia, Poland, and parts of Germany. We integrate intelligence from multiple sources, interrogations, surveillance, informant reports, radio intercepts. The result is a comprehensive picture of enemy underground activities. Harper's training had prepared him to maintain composure, but seeing the extent of German knowledge was shocking. They knew everything. Every resistance network in 3 countries was mapped in detail. The locations of agents, the identities of organizers, the structure of cells, all laid out with cartographic precision. Impressive work, Harper managed, though I imagine maintaining accuracy must be challenging. Intelligence changes rapidly. Indeed, which is why we update daily. Each morning, we receive intelligence summaries from field offices across the region. Our cartographers integrate new information, removing outdated markers, adding new ones. The maps are living documents, evolving as the situation develops. And these maps are used for counterintelligence operations primarily. When we identify a new resistance cell, the maps help us understand its connections to other cells, predict its supply routes, anticipate its activities. We can then decide whether to eliminate the cell immediately or monitor it to learn more about the broader network. Harper understood the implications immediately. This wasn't just a map, it was a weapon. And every day he delayed in getting this information to Allied Command, more agents and resistance fighters would die. Over the following weeks, Harper established himself in the Institute's routine. He was assigned to work on topographic analysis of Slovakia, ostensibly to help predict partisan activity in mountainous regions. The work was legitimate enough, but it also gave him access to the 3rd floor and reason to study the operations maps. The challenge was photographing them. The maps were too large to capture in single images, and Harper's concealed camera had limited capacity. He needed multiple visits, multiple angles, and he needed to do it without attracting attention. The opportunity came through a friendship with another cartographer, a Czech named Josef Novak. Novak was technically a collaborator, working for the Germans, but Harper sensed something underneath the surface. A tension, a careful neutrality in how he spoke about the war, a sadness in his eyes when discussing Czech casualties. They began having lunch together, discussing technical cartography matters. And slowly, carefully, Harper began probing. "The operations maps are remarkable," Harper mentioned casually one afternoon. "Though I wonder about the human cost of such precision. Each marker represents lives destroyed." Novak's expression didn't change, but he was quiet for a long moment. "We are cartographers, Dr. Dietrich. We map what exists. We don't create the reality we document." "Perhaps. But maps shape how people see reality. A map that shows resistance networks as threats justifies their elimination. A map that shows them as patriots defending their homeland tells a different story. Such philosophical distinctions are dangerous in our profession. We serve a science, not politics." But the seed was planted. Over subsequent weeks, Harper noticed Novak watching him with increased attention. Not suspicion exactly, but evaluation, testing whether Harper could be trusted with something. The breakthrough came after a particularly brutal day. News had arrived that a resistance cell in southern Bohemia had been destroyed, 43 people arrested, 12 executed immediately. Harper watched Novak update the map, removing markers that represented human lives, and saw the man's hand shake slightly as he worked. That evening, Novak approached Harper as they were leaving the Institute. "Dr. Dietrich, would you join me for a drink? There's a quiet place nearby." The bar was in a basement, dimly lit, and filled with locals who clearly knew to ignore whatever conversations happened there. Novak ordered Slivovitz and didn't speak until they were seated in a corner booth. "You're not really Dr. Franz Dietrich," he said quietly. "The real Dietrich died in 1940. Austrian military records confirm it. So who are you?" Harper's mind raced through options. Deny, bluff, attack, run. But looking at Novak's face, he saw something that made him take a risk. "Who do you think I am?" "Someone trying to get information out of that institute. The same thing I've been trying to do for 18 months. "Your resistance?" "I'm a cartographer who realizes what those maps mean. Every day I update them. I help the Germans destroy Czech patriots. I've tried to introduce errors, small inaccuracies that might help people survive. But Zimmerman checks everything. The system is too thorough." Harper made a decision that could get him killed. "If you could get complete copies of those maps to Allied intelligence, would you?" "If I could, I would have done it already. The security is too tight. Every piece of paper is logged, every map accounted for. I can't smuggle anything out." "But two people working together might manage what one cannot." Novak studied him for a long moment. "You're British, here to steal the maps. I'm here to save lives. Those maps represent hundreds of agents and thousands of resistance fighters. If we can get that information to Allied command, we can warn people, evacuate compromised positions, protect operations." "And you have a way to get the information out once you have it?" Harper hesitated. The truth was his extraction plan was minimal. A radio operator in Prague he could contact, a pickup location, a timeline that depended on everything going perfectly. But plans never survived contact with reality. "I have resources," he said carefully, "but I need access to photograph the maps. All of them. The complete network documentation." Novak was quiet for a long time, drinking his Slivovitz in small sips. Finally, "There's a way. Risky, but possible. The maps are photographed monthly for archival purposes. The photographs are stored in a secure room, but I have access because I'm responsible for maintaining the archive. If you could get into the Institute at night, I could let you into that room." The building's security is focused on preventing people from leaving with documents, not on preventing people from entering. The guards check everyone leaving, but someone with valid credentials can enter any time. We have researchers who work odd hours. You need to hide until the day shift leaves. Then I let you into the archive room. You photograph everything, we reseal the room, and you leave in the morning with the day shift." "What about the logs? Won't they show I was there overnight?" "I'll handle the logs. I've been doing small falsifications for months, changing dates on reports, altering update timestamps. Adding one name to an overnight worker list is simple. Harper considered the risks. If caught, they'd both be executed, probably after lengthy interrogation. But the potential value of the intelligence was extraordinary. Complete maps of German counterintelligence operations across Central Europe. It could save hundreds of lives and protect Allied operations for months. When, he asked. Tomorrow night. We'll never have a better opportunity. Zimmerman is traveling to Berlin for meetings. Security is always slightly relaxed when he's away. They planned meticulously. Harper would remain in the building after normal hours, hiding in a storage room on the second floor. At 8 in the evening, Novak would let him into the archive room on the third floor. Harper would have until 5 in the morning to photograph everything. 9 hours with his miniature camera and limited film capacity. Then Novak would reseal the room, and Harper would leave with the early morning shift. The next day passed with agonizing slowness. Harper maintained his normal routine, working on a Slovakia topography project, discussing technical matters with colleagues. But his mind was constantly calculating. Film capacity versus number of maps, lighting conditions in the archive room, backup plans if something went wrong. At 4:30 in the afternoon, as colleagues began leaving for the day, Harper made his move. He claimed to have left personal items in a storage area and excused himself. Instead of leaving, he slipped into a storage room on the second floor, hiding behind stacked boxes of old survey equipment. 2 hours passed in darkness and silence. Harper heard guards making rounds, heard the building settling into night mode. At precisely 8 o'clock, he heard the storage room door open. Novak stood silhouetted in the doorway. "It's clear. Follow me." They moved quickly through darkened corridors to the third floor. The operations room was dark, the massive wall maps visible only as shapes in the dim emergency lighting. Novak led Harper to a door marked Archives, authorized personnel only. Inside, filing cabinets lined the walls, each containing photographic copies of the operations maps, organized by date and region. Harper felt his chest tighten. This was it. Everything German counterintelligence knew about Allied operations in Central Europe, waiting to be documented. "You have until 5 o'clock, Novak said. "I'll be watching the security station. If anything changes, I'll knock 3 times. If that happens, abort everything and hide. Understand?" Harper nodded, already pulling out his camera equipment. As Novak left, he began working. The next hours were the most intense of Harper's life. He photographed map after map, working systematically through the files. Czechoslovakia, Poland, Eastern Germany, Austria. Every resistance network, every safe house, every agent the Germans had identified. His hands cramped, his eyes burned from focusing in dim light. But he kept working. At 3 in the morning, disaster struck. Harper heard voices in the corridor, German voices, speaking urgently. He froze, listening. Complete inspection. Someone reported hearing noises on the 3rd floor. Probably rats. This old building has them constantly. Nevertheless, we check everything. Reichsfuhrer's orders after that security breach in Vienna. Harper had seconds to decide. Hide and hope they didn't search thoroughly. Try to escape, or trust that Novak's warning system would work. 3 knocks on the door. Novak's signal. Harper quickly packed his camera and film, closed the filing cabinets exactly as he'd found them, and looked for hiding places. The room was sparse, cabinets, a desk, nothing that could conceal a person. Except, he looked up. The ceiling had old wooden beams with gaps between them and the ceiling panels. If he could reach them, wedge himself into the space. Using a chair, Harper climbed up, pulled himself into the narrow gap above the ceiling panels, and carefully repositioned the panel below him. It wasn't perfect. Anyone looking closely would notice the disturbance, but in dim light, it might pass inspection. Moments later, he heard the archive room door open. Flashlight beams swept across the room below him. Harper pressed himself flat against the beams, barely breathing, feeling dust tickling his nose and fighting the urge to sneeze. Empty. Files undisturbed. Check the cabinets. Harper heard drawers opening, files rustling. He'd been careful to leave everything exactly as he found it, but had he missed something? A document out of order. A drawer not quite closed properly. The inspection seemed to last hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, everything appears secure. Whatever noises were reported, they didn't involve this room. The door closed. Harper waited, counting to 1,000, before carefully moving. Every muscle had cramped from holding perfectly still. He lowered himself from the ceiling, checked that he'd left no obvious traces, and waited for Novak. His Czech colleague appeared 30 minutes later, face pale. That was too close. A security patrol decided to do random inspections. We need to finish quickly. Harper resumed photographing, but now with the added pressure of knowing security was heightened. He worked faster, accepting lower quality images in exchange for speed. By 4:30, he'd captured everything critical, not perfect documentation, but enough to reconstruct the German intelligence network. At 5 o'clock, Novak returned. Morning shift will arrive in 20 minutes. You need to join them. Act like you've been here all night, working on special research. I've added your name to the overnight log with a notation about topographic analysis. What about you? They'll investigate the security incident. Let them investigate. They'll find nothing wrong. A false alarm, rats in the walls, nervous guards. Happens all the time. Harper gripped Novak's hand. If this works, you've saved hundreds of lives. If it works, perhaps someday I can look at a map without seeing ghosts. Harper left the Institute with the morning shift, carrying his surveying equipment and several undeveloped rolls of film that contained intelligence worth more than gold. He returned to his hotel, retrieved his emergency radio equipment, and sent a brief coded message to his handlers. Package obtained. Request immediate extraction. The response came 6 hours later. Maintain cover. Extraction in 48 hours. Location Raven. Raven was a code word for a specific church in Prague's old town, a location scouted before the mission as an extraction point. 48 hours meant Harper had to maintain his cover for 2 more days, pretending to continue his academic work while carrying intelligence that could get him tortured to death if discovered. Those 2 days were the longest of Harper's life. He continued reporting to the Institute, working on a Slovakia project, having lunch with colleagues, including Novak, who gave no indication anything unusual had happened. But Harper saw increased security presence, more checkpoints, more random inspections. On the second night, Harper made his way to the designated church. The extraction plan was simple. Wait in the confessional booth, make contact with the priest, who was actually a Czech resistance member, be smuggled out of Prague in a delivery truck. But as Harper approached the church, he saw German military vehicles parked outside. His instinct screamed trap, but he had no backup plan, nowhere else to go. His false papers would hold up under normal scrutiny, but not determine investigation. He needed to make the extraction point. He walked past the church, circling the block, observing. The German presence wasn't surrounding the church. They were conducting a random document check in the square. Bad luck, bad timing, but not necessarily a compromised extraction. Harper waited in a cafe, drinking terrible coffee, until the German patrol moved on. Then he approached the church again, entered through a side door, and made his way to the confessional. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned," he said in Czech, using the code phrase. The response came in accented English. "Your sins are many, my son, but redemption awaits." The priest, a young man with the hard eyes of someone who'd seen too much death, quickly moved Harper through the church to a basement storage area. There, hidden under dusty boxes of religious supplies, was a false panel leading to a tunnel. "This connects to a building 3 blocks away," the priest explained. "A bakery. They're expecting you. From there, a truck to the countryside, then a small plane to England. The Germans have increased patrols, so the journey will be dangerous, but it's the best we can do. Thank you. You're risking your life for this." We all risk our lives every day. The question is what we risk them for. Go with God, friend, and may whatever you carry be worth the price. The tunnel was cramped, dark, and smelled of mold and decay. Harper crawled through, pulling his equipment bag behind him, feeling the weight of the undeveloped film that contained secrets worth dying for. The bakery was warm and filled with the smell of bread. The baker, an elderly woman who introduced herself only as grandmother, provided him with food and workman's clothing. You'll travel hidden in flour deliveries. Uncomfortable but effective. The Germans rarely search thoroughly. They don't want to ruin food supplies. The journey out of Prague took 12 hours, hidden under sacks of flour in the back of a delivery truck. Harper couldn't see anything, could barely breathe, feeling every bump in the road and hearing every German checkpoint. Each time the truck stopped for inspection, he held his breath, expecting discovery. But grandmother's reputation and proper papers got them through. In the countryside, Harper was transferred to a farm that served as a resistance safe house. There, finally, he developed his film. The images were grainy, some poorly lit, but they showed the maps clearly enough. German counterintelligence operations across Central Europe, laid bare in photographic detail. 3 days later, a small plane landed in a farmer's field at midnight. Harper climbed aboard with his precious cargo, and they flew low over the countryside toward Allied territory. Anti-aircraft fire traced paths through the darkness, but the pilot was skilled and lucky. 6 hours later, they landed at an RAF base in southern England. Harper was debriefed for 3 days straight, intelligence analysts poring over his photographs and his detailed memory of everything he'd seen at the Institute. The information was classified at the highest level and immediately disseminated to Allied intelligence services across Europe. Within a week, operations began based on Harper's intelligence. Compromised safe houses were evacuated, exposed agents withdrawn, resistance cells relocated. The Germans suddenly found their carefully documented networks disappearing, their sources going silent, their operations failing mysteriously. And in Prague, Dr. Klaus Zimmermann stared at his operations maps with growing horror as they became less accurate with each passing day. The perfect intelligence picture they'd built over years was suddenly unreliable. Agents they thought were identified vanished. Networks they believed compromised operated successfully. Something had gone terribly wrong. The investigation was thorough and brutal. Every member of the Institute was interrogated. Security logs were examined line by line, but they found nothing, no missing documents, no unauthorized access, no evidence of a breach. Joseph Novak continued his work, updating maps with intelligence that was increasingly wrong, watching the Germans chase ghosts based on information that Allied command now knew to manipulate. He never spoke of the night he'd helped a British agent photograph Germany's counterintelligence, crown jewels. That secret he kept until his death decades later, when newly declassified documents finally revealed his role. As for Harper, he returned to teaching after the war, training new generations of intelligence officers in the arts of infiltration and deception. He never revealed the full details of his Prague operation, maintaining the official silence that protected sources and methods. But sometimes, late at night, he would unfold old maps and remember the hours spent in that archive room, documenting secrets that would save hundreds of lives. The operation had a lasting impact that went beyond the immediate intelligence value. It taught the Allies that the Germans' counterintelligence operations, while sophisticated, were vulnerable to penetration. It demonstrated that cartography and geographic intelligence were weapons as important as bombs and bullets. And it proved that sometimes the greatest victories came not from destroying enemy positions, but from understanding them so completely that they became worthless. Years later, in declassified assessments, military historians would describe the Prague cartography operation as one of the most significant intelligence coups of the war. By capturing a comprehensive picture of German counterintelligence operations, Harper had effectively blinded them in Central Europe for critical months, allowing resistance networks to rebuild and Allied operations to proceed with dramatically improved security. But Harper himself never saw it as heroic. To him, it was simply a job that needed doing, a task that required specific skills, careful planning, and enormous luck. The real heroes, he believed, were people like Novak, who lived under occupation every day, who risked everything not for glory or recognition, but because they couldn't accept what their country had become. The cartographer's deception, as it came to be known in classified intelligence circles, demonstrated a fundamental truth about espionage, that the most valuable secrets were often hidden in plain sight, documented in ordinary files and recorded on unremarkable maps. The skill was in recognizing their value and having the courage to obtain them. And sometimes, Harper reflected in his later years, the most important deceptions weren't about fooling the enemy. They were about convincing yourself you could do something impossibly dangerous, walking into the heart of enemy operations armed with nothing but forged papers and a camera, and somehow walking out alive with secrets that would change the course of history. The maps he photographed in Prague were eventually donated to military archives after the war, serving as historical records of German counterintelligence operations. Researchers studying them decades later would marvel at their detail and sophistication, never realizing that their very existence in Allied hands represented one of the most daring intelligence operations of the entire war. Some secrets stayed buried forever. The identities of sources, the specific methods of extraction, the names of people who'd risked everything to make the operation succeed. These were the professional confidences that intelligence work demanded, the prices paid for operating in shadows. But the impact remained, measured in lives saved and operations protected, in resistance fighters who survived because someone warned them in time, in agents who escaped because their cover hadn't been as compromised as the Germans believed. Numbers Harper would never know, names he would never learn, but consequences that rippled through the war in ways that could never be fully calculated. That was the real measure of success in intelligence work, not medals or recognition, but the quiet knowledge that somewhere, somehow, the work had mattered, that in a world at war, where death and destruction dominated headlines, there were still people working in shadows to save lives, one secret at a time.